And good afternoon. Welcome to IWFM's UAE Region Webinar 2 of 2020. The subject for today is the new realities in FM in the Middle East. Joining us today is a different team from the last event we put on in April. There's myself, David Kerr, as the producer. I'll be handing over shortly to Sara Momtaz, who will be your moderator for the day. The time starting here in UAE is at 4 o'clock. We've got people joining us from Saudi Arabia and also in the UK, where it's still 1 o'clock. Panelists today, Alex Davis, Abdullah Al-Sheri and Carla Reid. And I'll leave it to Sara to do the detailed introductions. For this webinar, our sponsors for today are, as previously, there's Adib and Quality and BFM, and Mace and Tafelwork, part of Eltizam. I'm grateful to all of the sponsors. And the details of IWFM, primarily for those who are new to such events, we have both a vision and a mission, as all good organizations have. And the mission, which is what gives us the drive and the focus to be able to hold these webinars, is to empower and enable workplace and facilities management. Never before challenged as much as they have been within the last 6 months. The strategic aims of IWFM are 5 in number, and apart from being recognised and first choice destinations and a role of fostering and to be a development partner, it's also the appropriate capabilities to fulfil purpose and aspirations. So the whole purpose of us holding these webinars, for us to differentiate from other organisations, is to stimulate and to develop appreciation of the challenges in workplace and FM. So for the focus for today, as we said, new realities in FM in the Middle East. We elected early on not to have one common theme, but in between the webinars to try to decide upon a new topic, which will then be more relevant as events unfold in the wider world. But we're still looking very much at a Middle Eastern program. So apart from the introductions, which Sara will do in detail, she'll run through then with 3 panel questions. Each will be followed by a straw poll. We're hoping very much for an interactive program as we ran last event. And it's the opportunity for you to respond to a multiple choice radio button question. We assure you that all of your responses are completely anonymous. They're not forwarded on to any higher organization. And we are, as a IWFM organization, governed by GDPR regulations. The open question and answers, part of the feedback from the last event, would be that we spare more time towards that. And so we've fine-tuned the way in which we're going to ask the questions of the panelists so that there is more opportunity. For each of you, you'll see on your dashboard screens, there is a small section on the grey panel marked questions, and you can submit your questions at any time throughout the webinar to a team of people who are sitting with me as part of the production crew, and we will then aggregate common questions into a selective individual question, and we'll pose those to each of the panelists in turn towards the end. And then we'll have the closing remarks, coming events, and then at the very end, a mini survey for you to give your feedback again as to how you felt this event ran. So that's it from me. I'll hand you over to now to Sara Momtaz, who'll be your moderator for the afternoon. Over to you, Sara.
Thank you, David. Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon to you all. It's my absolute pleasure to be with you today, hosting the second in the IWFM UAE webinar series, New Realities in FM in the Middle East. So please allow me to introduce our diverse and esteemed panelists for today's discussions. They are not just colleagues within the industry, and just as the last webinar session, I'm delighted to announce that we're also amongst friends this afternoon. Firstly, I'm pleased to welcome Alex Davis, Master of Engineering and a certified member of IWFM and member of the IWFM UAE Committee. Alex currently works as the Chief Operating Officer for one of the UAE's leading developers. He has over 20 years experience in asset and infrastructure management, development and maintenance in both the UK and the UAE. Welcome, Alex, and it's good to have you with us today. Moving on, Thanks, Alex. Moving on, I'm thrilled to announce or introduce, shall I say, our second speaker today, who is joining us all the way from Saudi Arabia and will be enlightening us with his perspective from the KSA market. Engineer Abdullah Al-Shehri is an executive MBA and Bachelor of Science Honours in Mechanical Engineering. He also holds several specialist quality-centric qualifications, working for a major national bank in KSA in the capacity of Vice President Facilities Management. Abdullah is tasked with key roles in disaster recovery planning and business continuity management. Abdullah has over 13 years experience in FM services, predominantly for corporate facilities and data centers across the kingdom. Welcome, Abdullah, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Sara.
And finally, but by no means last, I'm delighted to introduce Carla Reid, both a Bachelor of Science and Master of Science degree holder. Carla is a certified IWFM member and is on the FM Consultancy Council for IFMA, the US-based International Facilities Management Association. Carla currently works in the asset management and development sector for iconic Abu Dhabi projects. She has over 20 years experience in FM service delivery solutions and consulting in the Caribbean, the UK and the Middle East. Welcome, Carla, and it's great to have you all for today's discussion.
Thank you, Sara.
Thank you, Carla. Before we get started, just want to reiterate on what David mentioned for the attendees. It's a very interactive session. We will be having a Q&A session at the end. So if you wish to pose a question to our panelists, please feel free to do so. David is standing by to receive your messages. In addition to that, we'll also be airing the straw poll questions for which there are 3 possible options for you to choose from in relation to which one is most suited to your answer. Do bear in mind, again, as David mentioned, it's completely anonymous. Your details are not captured. We believe that, getting realistic and transparent feedback from our audience is essential to ensuring that we as FM professionals representing the industry are able to provide honest feedback and provide a platform to support our colleagues and peers to excel in this profession. So please go ahead and participate. Today's session is also going to be recorded and will be released in due course on the IWFM website. Right, so with all the formalities out the way, without further ado, let's get started on the first discussion point. So question A, how has COVID-19 impacted on employment security? And I'd like to start with Alex, if I may.
Thank you, Sara. So good afternoon to everyone. I think it's a very big question, and I think we all see the press, which largely does focus on the negative, but we've got to understand it sector by sector and what absolutely the impact is on employment security, particularly in the longer term. We've still got to understand it. I think talking more locally from what we're seeing here in the UAE, we're starting to see a shift in sectors. And focusing on some of those sectors that are absolutely strengthening. So the need for logistics, the need for distribution, the need for warehousing is all on the rise. And I suppose as an FM professional, I'm really kind of pleased by the role that the profession of housekeeping, their increased importance across the whole of society is just going to increase further and further, not just in the short term with sanitisation programmes, but as we go longer, the importance of that as a profession, I think will really emerge and strengthen as we go forward. I think the right way to answer this is also, how are we going to increase or ensure employment security? And I think the one word that springs to my mind is flexibility. We're all flexibly working from home, working remotely, working very differently through digital channels such as this. We've got to be flexible in our responsibilities, and that goes throughout the organisation. So we're regularly seeing lifeguards where pools are closed being redeployed into housekeeping. We're seeing security professionals having to take a very different role in terms of access control, and not just in terms of credentials, but actually ensuring the health of someone that's entering a facility. And then also we've got to be flexible to what our customers need, particularly as FM professionals. As the situation evolves, customers' needs are evolving, and we've got to be incredibly flexible to meet with them and meet their regulatory requirements as well as their end customer requirements.
Thank you, Alex. Just want to ask you, do you think that the FM industry in comparison to other industries is more or less affected?
I honestly, I think it's less affected. I think we're gonna see the impact of differing workplaces and differing work styles in the medium term. And there is short-term issues across the globe around people restriction movements, recruitment movement is causing issues, and facilities closing or operating on reduced capacity is having a short-term impact. But I think once we look towards the medium term, I think FM should be a very resilient sector. And my view on that really hasn't changed. I think FM will see the resilience, the facilities will be there, but the resilience of workplace and FM professionals is largely going to be driven by their flexibility to meet these changes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for your insight, Alex. Abdullah, over to you.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'll let you, but I'll discuss about in our FM department. It worked both ways. We stopped, for example, providing some FM soft services like hospitality. And sadly, the hospitality staff were let go as we stopped the services. On the other hand, some FM sections or services, for example, logistic services or cleaning or hygiene, such as, and also an mail services, worked overtime to ensure delivering all PPE to all our facilities. What I want to say, in each crisis, there will always be some sectors will be affected and in either good or negative way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Abdullah. Just to touch on that, do you see a similar trend in employment security in KSA than to that of the UAE, or do you think there are significant differences?
It's almost same. If we say some sectors it's really affected and some businesses were closed. Some businesses it's positively impacted for this crisis. It depends, and nowadays still we are in the crisis, not yet finished. We cannot judge either we affected or not affected until now.
Yeah, and Saudi's been quite badly affected when you look at the numbers there. Thank you, Abdullah, much appreciated. Carla, can I have your thoughts, please?
Yes, I think I'm quite in tune with the panelists in saying that employment security has been affected, but I think our leadership is showing forth in the region right now in terms of whether they're looking at it in the short term or the long term. I think if they're looking at it in the long term, we can see examples of big companies such as Etihad, some mall operators, they're repurposing staff. So if you're thinking in the long term, employment security is not affected. If you haven't got things like your BCM plans and your business continuity strategies, you're gonna find that you're gonna get affected in the short term because you had no plans for any eventualities that would happen. And in this case, I think the shining stars are really some of the property managers and some of the asset managers who have really seen the need to improve their services in data centers, in providing more computer and data related support. You find a lot of staff now moving into that sector. So I see repurposing of staff is not really affecting employment security at the minute in the region and UAE.
Interesting. No, absolutely. I mean, like you said, you've got a lot of people. Also, Alex mentioned it earlier, that are basically moving around from different departments and different divisions to be utilized. Carla, just want to ask you, do you think the employment security issue will have more of an effect on professional or technical staff in FM?
I think professional staff, I think for FM, and I'm the further optimist, with the leaders that I interface with, I think they're more long-term and more forward-thinking. And in that case, you find them training their staff more in new technology. They're looking at doing maintenance activities that they've been waiting for a long time to do in airports, in roadways, and so on. So I really don't think that it will be affected in any adverse way at the minute.
Great, and thank you for being an optimist, Carla. It's always good to hear that, and thanks for your kind and wise words. Shall we move on to the straw poll question? First one, please. So for the audience members, you should see the question come up on your screens. You've got 3 options. And again, I'm going to mention the fact that this is completely anonymous. So please go ahead and choose the response that best meets your circumstances. And the question is employment impact by loss of job or salary cuts. Please select one of the following. I'm fully employed and paid in full on time. I've been made redundant or had a salary cut. I expect to lose my job, go part-time or have a pay cut soon. So a few more seconds to answer that. And then we will we'll publish the results. Shouldn't take much longer. I think we're ready for the results. Can we have a look at the results, please? Okay, interesting. So we've got 61% that are still fully employed and paid on time and paid in full, which is great. 36%, so we're looking around about a third of the audience, which is quite significant, have either been made redundant or had a salary cut, and 3% do still expect to lose their job. So very interesting result there. Thank you very much for the attendees in participating. Let's move on to our next discussion point, if we can, please. Okay, so moving forward, which latest innovation impact, regulation, KPI, or other commercial changes will have a significant effect? And if I'd like to start with Alex on this one, please.
So I think from a regulation point of view, I think it's quite early to comment on where they're going to evolve to. We're very much seeing regulations being temporary measures or medium term, and I think we're still yet to see how these regulations are going to land at every level, globally, regionally or nationally. So it's probably very early to comment on the regulation side, and I suppose the innovation impact will largely come as a result of that in the medium term. I think probably one of the biggest impacts that we'll see as an industry is around the KPIs and the commercial ability of individuals to deliver those KPIs. As we've seen a lot of movement restrictions, a lot of closure of facilities, a lot of increase in requirements, you know, whether your KPIs are measured on an input or an output based scenario, I think that's the biggest commercial change. So it depends on exactly what your contract form is. But your ability to achieve an output specification on a very rapidly changing regulatory environment in the short term, I think is probably the biggest commercial impact for people. You know, even the simplest things such as a 50% reduction in vehicle capacity for operatives here in the UAE, all of a sudden impacts people's ability to deliver those outcomes. So I think probably the biggest thing we're seeing at the moment is those KPIs. I think if we then marry on top of that how customers are going to manage those KPIs, and I think to avoid some of the challenges that commercially would be impacting organisations, I can see people going much more to the output specifications in their KPIs. And people's ability to manage those outputs of a clean, safe, and maintained environment at a very high level are really going to drive some change. And I think that's where the innovations are going to come, is how do we become less reliant on people? How do we become more reliant on technology? And how do we actually make sure we use that technology to deliver the outcomes required of the KPIs?
Yes, interesting. Thank you, Alex. Just want to ask you, I mean, you mentioned a few of the sort of reformed ways of going about doing our day-to-day work. What physical distancing, or I don't like to use the term social distancing, because I actually think we've all been still quite social, we're just not physically close to one another. So physical distancing or sort of enhanced hygiene measures that you're aware of have proven significant and would be referred to as a new norm. Is there anything that kind of sticks out in your mind?
Good question, Sara. Well done.
I don't mean to put you on the spot. It's only because you mentioned, quite a few good, examples. I just wanted to know if there's anything in particular that you're quite keen to see as a new norm.
I think in terms of the new norm, I think Carla mentioned in our last response, I think the rise and the importance of business continuity planning, I think is going to be a new norm. So whereas previously a lot of our operations plannings within FM was done from an efficiency point of view, so staff coming from one location, staff coming in highly loaded buses, etc., I think that's going to change. And I think we're going to be in an impact where people are going to require their teams to come from different places to make sure that there is segregation between teams and to hit the regulatory requirements. So I think we're going to see a different paradigm and a paradigm shift in terms of what we look at as efficient, because traditionally we've always looked at efficient of stack them high, move people quickly, and make sure that that we're doing things as economically efficient as possible. I think the importance of resilience and the importance of business continuity and how efficient we are when we're in a business continuity mode, I think is really going to be a new shift for us. And I can't see that going away. As much as Touchless and Sara, we will return to a normal working practice, whatever that normal is. But I think the importance of resilience and business continuity it's not going to be above economic impact, don't get me wrong, but I think we're going to see it rising up that chain and actually be something that we're openly talking about as an industry.
Absolutely, and you mentioned something, and it's actually a point that we discussed in the previous webinar, whereby pandemics as such were never part of anyone's sort of disaster recovery strategy. It was never there. Earthquakes, fires, and those kind of things obviously are covered. But I think pandemics now, in terms of organizations, are going to be something that's going to be excuse me, going to be looked at strategically. Thank you, Alex. Same question to Abdullah.
Yes, from my own experience, regulation and innovation have had more effect during this pandemic. I will give you an example. We face it. We face an issue for the ability to remotely access the system, which was very difficult before due to the IT regulations. We worked with our IT department to reduce the restrictions of obtaining remote access to enable our all staff to work more from home. Working from home was difficult at first, but then we are all now used to working from home. I also noticed that now we have a better meetings management, as most of our meetings are now conducted online. From the regulation is impacted, and the innovation also now for the using some technologies for the meeting and working through home, through access.
It's interesting, Abdullah, you mentioned technologies. I'd like to touch on that point. As you're exposed to the corporate workplace, I mean, if we look at existing technologies such as Bluetooth that can be used for, touchless contact in elevators, possibly having apps that provide real-time data on the overall health, air quality and occupancy levels of a building, even simpler forms such as moving large office equipment like printers that are normally kept in the middle of, in the corner of the office to more of an open space to prevent congestion of employees. Do you think that's going to be useful in your particular environment?
Yeah, actually we applied all of that. Now, no anymore touch. Even an elevator, we programmed all by card. No touch now. We programmed the employee staff which floor using, not touching, using the access control card to the elevator panel. It will deliver, take the stuff to his floor. For the printers also using the same access card for the printer. No touch now. We avoid any touch. We keep all the doors of entrances, all the door offices open to avoid any touch.
Yes, we're a touchless society,
Yeah,
as
yeah.
it were. Thank you, Abdullah, for your valued feedback. Let's go over to Carla for her perspective, please.
Well, I'm just going to take it from the point of innovation and just to touch on some of what Alex also said regarding the KPI. There's a lot of infrastructural changes that are happening to buildings and facilities, including recently now QR code technology is being installed in buildings and quite a lot of no-touch facilities. But what is becoming more important for a lot of FM and corporate clients, it's for BIM and the ability to remotely monitor buildings. Earlier, BIM got a bad rap, BMS got a bad rap, but we can see now that BMS is now getting GSM connections. We can talk to buildings from home. We can modulate and simulate what we want to happen on buildings while we're away, even on sites. So I think these aren't going to be new costs that will need to be looked into. On the KPI, contracts are changing because the contracts need to reflect these new technologies now. And as Alex says, how do you evaluate them? How do you assess them? How do you meet those requirements? So that's the thinking that is going on in the background now with C-suite clients and investors.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I agree with you 100% in terms of, you know, the bad rap that BIM had, you know, previously, even up until, I would say, even up to about a year or two ago. And now we're going to be really heavily relying on those technologies. Carla, in terms of a more face-to-face and practical solution, do you think certain innovations such as enhancing HVAC systems to have the highest grade filters, you know, to be able to pick up the smallest of particles, and maybe foot access controls where push buttons are necessary, do you think those will come into play as a sort of new norm of service delivery?
Well, as you know, in the UK and in the US right now, there's a lot of work going on in IoTs, and a lot of investment is now going into Internet of Things to understand how people are moving, where do we need to increase airflow, air changes, and so on. ASHRAE is now working on very detailed COVID guidance. CIBSE has just published some guidance also on HVAC systems. We're going to see it, but again, it's going to go sector by sector because utilization is going to drive that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carla. It's always good to have your technical expertise. On that note, I'd like to move on, please, to the second straw poll question. Okay, so fingers at the ready. Same principle as before. You have three possible options. The question is, have organizations adapted to reflect new service delivery processes, innovation, KPI, and rules? So first option is, yes, we have resources, including PPE and service changes made. Second option is, we don't yet have all the resources, but expect to soon. And finally, it's not applicable. We have not identified any changes. So this is obviously a response, a personal response for each of the attendees. You're going to be responding accordingly. I'll just give you a few more seconds to do so. And while you're doing that, just to remind you about the question and answer session, which is going to be coming up shortly. Please send any questions that you would like to put to the panelists, and David will receive them and direct them over to us accordingly. Okay, I think we've had about 20 or so seconds, so that should be good. Can we please release the results of the second straw poll? Oh, wow, that's excellent. So we've got 85% of those of you who have answered. Extremely proactive. You've already basically implemented and, you know, got everything that you need in terms of resources, and all the service changes have been made. Only 12% haven't done so, but do expect to do so soon. And a very small number, 3%, feel that it's not applicable to their personal circumstances. Thank you very much for all of you who answered that. And let's go on to the third discussion point. So we want to talk about well-being, because obviously, you know, it's not just about the well-being of the assets that we look after, it's also about the well-being of the employees. So the next discussion point will be what well-being priorities have arisen for workforces, workplaces, or just work in general. And in true fashion, we'd like to start with Alex, please.
Thank you, Sara. So well-being, I suppose, translating that into health, and particularly, and I think it's been quite in focus this pandemic, is mental health. I think the lack of face-to-face social interaction has been taking a toll on a number of people across the world, within various organisations and within friendship groups as well. And we're all social beings, and we do need that interaction. I think we've all started to adjust to this virtual interaction, but it's just not quite the same. And just making sure, and how exactly do we check in with our teams? You know, if you've not heard from a team member for a couple of days, how are we checking in with them? How are we making sure that they've got a space? You know, the drop by office sort of thing about how are you today? How are we making sure that we have those interactions into what's becoming an increasingly a packed schedule? I think a couple of other things with mental health to consider is that there has been research, and I can't cite it, I forget where I've read this, but virtual meetings are actually more intense than a face-to-face meeting. People's concentration needs to be a lot higher, and we also tend to do a lot more of them. Certainly my diary's gone from a lot more of appointments, and we're now in a position where 15-minute appointments to discuss topics that we normally have had longer to do. It is now becoming commonplace using those digital channels. So we've really got to work out how exactly we get that balance right. And if you add on top of all of that, this lack of distance, the actual distance from home to work has decreased to, for most of us, 0. You know, we're now working at home, and how do we generate that distance? How do we make sure all of this is all captured? So how are we checking in with people at the beginning or in the middle of the day, making sure that they're okay, checking their families are okay, checking that their stress levels are okay? How are we making sure that people have downtime? Because now we're all set up with our laptops at home, we don't have that physical downtime. I certainly know for me personally, that commute to and from work was a bit of a ramp up and a ramp down from the day. I now I'm lucky enough to have a home office. I leave my office and I'm straight into home. How do we distance that? How do I not go and speak to my partner like she's someone who works for me? It's a real challenge, and that mental health really has become a priority. So how do we absolutely tackle that mental health? And obviously some of that is through physical health initiatives, but also making sure that a priority has been to equip leaders and managers and supervisors for remote workers. How exactly do they engage? Because we've got to be really careful not to slip into this no news is good news mode, and need to make sure that we're absolutely connecting with people virtually as we would have done in the office environment.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, you touched on a very valid point in terms of the sort of mental and emotional well-being of people, because I'm the same as you, Alex. If I'm in the car driving to and from the office, you know, that's my kind of like ramp up and ramp down time. And if you're working from home, you don't really get that. Do you think, Alex, that generally employees are grateful to employers who express an interest in their well-being at this time, you know, considering the challenges that you've mentioned, such as working from home and possibly childcare issues? Do you think there is a sense that, you know, there's more of a sort of solidarity between colleagues and management? Alex, I'm not sure if you're there.
Sorry. I think it's a double-edged sword. So I think on one hand, it's been actually really interesting with my peers and my leadership and also my team to understand more about their home life. You know, the children walking in, the dogs in the background, and other things that are going on, I think really does connect people in a stronger way. I think on the other side of that is people's ability to verbalize how they're feeling is a real challenge. It's amazing how much our emotional intelligence relies on body language. That someone's walked in the office and they're obviously tired, or they're obviously stressed, or they're obviously happy with something that's going on. And I think it's taking a lot for individuals within teams to actually verbalize those emotions, because there is no longer those overt cues that we get from body language. So I think it's a double-edged sword. So I think we're closer, we know more about people, but I think we're more distanced from actually how emotionally connected we are to people to really understand where their head is at mentally at any point in time.
No, it's an interesting point, because I think most of the audience can relate to it as well. I mean, I've definitely got to know a lot more about my colleagues and, you know, friends at work in terms of their family and their background and their hobbies and all the rest of it, because you're so much more involved in their home life just because people have had to be working from home. Thank you, Alex. I always appreciate your comments and feedback. Can we go on to Abdullah, so we can get your thoughts, please, Abdullah?
Yes, sir. I would say changes to workplace. This is because we have a limited number of facilities to accommodate all our staff with the recommended physical distancing. How we solve this issue? So to resolve this issue with the minimum time and cost, we went with 4 solutions. First solution, we go for rearranging the existing offices area. Second solution, utilizing vacant space and constructed new offices to accommodate more. The third solution, we apply the working through shifts, some areas, some floor, which is over capacity. The fourth solution, enabling the remote access until they get the new area or this spaces with the social distancing. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Abdullah. Just want to ask you, I mean, obviously, you know, we're very privileged to have you from Saudi Arabia and, you know, bringing in your insight from there. Do you actually, or have you noticed, should I say, a heightened concern in the KSA FM market, specifically on well-being of the workforce? Or has it always been a priority in your opinion?
Also, as we said, until now, the FM sector is not impacted. There is some section or some areas in the facilities affected. As I said, it's the hospitalities, some soft services already affected. Some areas is not affected yet, and some areas is positively impacted, such as the cleaning, hygiene services, logistics. It depends.
Depends on the sector. Thank you,
Yes.
Abdullah, for your feedback. Same question over to Carla, please.
Right. Well, I'm going to take it in a different direction. I'm going to take well-being for the people who are actually working, because we tend to think in this situation that all of us are at home. There are quite a few people who are still working, and they're working different hours, different shifts, including the maintenance teams. You notice across Dubai and Abu Dhabi, we've been doing a very intensive disinfection program in public areas. So those guys are working at nights. They're getting quite a lot of support from the municipalities and from their own companies in terms of rest, in terms of breaks. The hotel sector is doing very well in providing a lot of rates for nurses and doctors who are on the front line. I was moved recently, and I think you probably know Sara, Sheikha Fatima. She provided breakfast for all of the nurses and
Yes.
people who are working on the front line.
Yes.
This is, as we know, the hospitality in the Middle East is well noted. And I think especially here in the UAE, I think they've taken special care to look after those people who are on the front line. So they don't have to worry about meals. They don't have to worry about getting their kids looked after or getting extra support from schools and ADEC and so on. I think this is going on in the background for those who are working. So while Alex and Abdullah has touched on those who are not physically going into the offices, I think those who are working are also being well supported.
No, and it's wonderful that you mentioned that, because I mean, obviously these are key workers, and a lot of the time, you know, when we're talking about FM, we're not actually discussing the trials and tribulations, if you like, that the people on the front line are going through. Without them, there would be no FM. And I'm really happy that you mentioned it. So touching on that, Carla, do you think there's anything more that we can be doing as an FM community in the region to contribute to their well-being? I mean, we're having these type of webinars, but it's more for the professional audience. But you know, during these sort of turbulent times, is there anything that we could be doing to have more camaraderie between us and the guys on the front line?
I think there are quite a few things that are happening. I think one of them, Sarah, you're part of, including the FM awards for, you know, best FM manager and these sort of things. I think we can start to recognize a little bit more of the technicians who are working, cleaners who are really working in the hospitals, because we keep forgetting that the hospitals are run by engineers and cleaners and maintenance professionals, and even consultants who are trying to decide, you know, how do we isolate airstreams from certain different places. So I think we can support them with probably more training opportunities like these webinars for technicians, for some of the FM managers, because they're working 24 hours. They're not going to have the facility to go and do a degree somewhere. And I've always been very, very an advocate of training up our technicians and making them part owners of the estate.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you, Carla, for your discerning feedback. And thank you for bringing a different perspective to the discussion so that we get a very comprehensive overview on each of the talking points. So without further ado, I do believe it's time for the final straw poll question. So if we can have that, and then once we finish this, we can go over to the questions and answer session. So of course, the question is related to well-being, and the question is, which source of major well-being issue comes highest in priority for you? So this again, it's a question for each of the attendees to be answering from their own personal perspective. Would it be changes to work hours or workplace? Domestic health risks to family and friends, which is actually very in line with what Carla mentioned, because you know, you could be working on the front lines and possibly being exposed to the virus. Or would it be employment security and continuity? So please go ahead and select one of those. We'll give you a few more seconds. And I'm sure, you know, while you're responding, I believe David's been busy receiving all the questions. So that we can have them answered accordingly. Okay, I think that's enough time. Can we please release the results? Wow, okay, so number 2 and 3, pretty much even Steven. So that's very interesting. So there's a huge amount of the people listening that are actually quite concerned about the domestic health risks to their friends and family. So again, Carla, that goes back to your point in terms of people working on the front lines. Employment security is another one that people are concerned about, which also heightens the concerns that are out there, not just in our industry, but of course, you know, across the board. And just only 7% for changes to work hours and workplace. Interesting. Thank you very much for those who've taken part in the straw poll. I believe we're ready for the questions and answers session. And I'd like to actually ask the first question to Alex. So the first question that we've had is, what corporate responses do we expect to see regarding Openplan, Hotdesking, breakout rooms? The logical changes will go into contrary for the industry trends over the last 20 years.
I think quite a lot of containment in there. I think Hotdesking, actually quite the reverse to what a lot of people think in terms of Hotdesking. I think Hotdesking will increase. What we're certainly seeing a lot of corporates do with their planning is obviously having to increase distancing, and therefore they get less space utilization. So if you combine less space utilization with the need for business continuity and segregation of teams, I think we're actually going to see increases in Hotdesking, because as Abdullah said earlier, there are different shifts going on. So in order to actually get the use out of that space and to maintain social distancing, the use of shifts will actually increase the use of Hotdesking. So I know a lot of people think that this is going to put a stop to it and people want their own space. I think in terms of as corporates assess the impact of this on the real estate, I think Hotdesking will actually be a solution for a lot of this. Obviously there'll be a drive from individuals, and it's going to need to be managed very carefully from corporates that do want their own dedicated space and their own segregation. Breakout rooms, I think we're still going to see breakout rooms. I think obviously again there's going to be social distancing involved, but I actually think breakout rooms are going to become more important because they're actually quite open spaces that allow us to meet larger teams of people, enabling social distancing. So rather than it being around the coffee machine or the water cooler, depending on where you are in the world, I think we're going to start to see a lot more social interaction through the breakout spaces, and I can see them actually becoming more and more important. But again, that's going to have to be very closely managed in terms of capacities, in terms of social distancing, in terms of sanitization of equipment used, and all of those control measures. But I think actually, I think control measures will change. I think space usage will change in terms of restrictions, social distancing, occupancy, but actually the layout of our office, there'll be some minor tweaks as you've discussed about, printers being the center of rooms rather than in the corners of rooms. But I don't think overall, there'll be a huge impact on the offices we see today. But I just think the way we regulate them, the way we use them is going to change. But I think in terms of core principles, they're here to stay, and if anything, I think we might see them more prevalent.
Excellent, thank you, Alex. We've got another question, and we're going to direct this one for Abdullah, please.
Yes.
Hi, Abdullah. The question is about impacts in KSA on FM from VAT and custom rates, cost of travel. It's a big country, the air travel and bus empty spare seats and so on and so forth. Is there confidence that major projects will take time to re-energize post-COVID? Is basically the question.
Yeah, I think the question is the impact of the VAT and the custom rate, new rate. Yeah.
Correct.
For sure, that will affect all the organizations, especially the retail market will be impacted. To resolve that impact, I think all the organization will look about the operation cost to start reducing the operation cost. If they reduce it, for sure, the projects will be impacted. Some services will be impacted. I think will be huge impacted because the VAT increasing from 5% to 15%. Many items, the customs increased from 10 to 20%.
Yeah, it's a significant increase.
Yeah.
It's a significant increase. Sorry, Abdullah, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please carry on.
Yeah. Okay, I finished.
And what about in terms of KPIs? Do you think that's going to have a commercial effect? So let's talk about your industry, specific in terms of banking and corporate services. Do you think that's going to have an effect on the KPIs that you have?
Yeah, for sure. Any impact in the corporate companies for sure will affect our corporate sectors. Actually, the bank is depend on three main businesses: the retail, the corporate, the treasury.
Okay.
If any impact, if one of them, for sure will affect the profit of the bank.
Okay. Thank you, Abdullah.
Welcome.
I believe David's just going to go through a few more questions. We've got another question coming through for Carla.
Sure.
Okay. Carla, this one's for you. Have you heard of an effective solution when iconic site revenues are down and resources are extended, are on extended contracts where people can't travel?
I haven't heard of any at all. No.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure what that question. Actually, I'm a little bit confused by the question, honestly, Carla. Okay.
I think maybe they're trying to see if I mean, think of any of the iconic sites that we have. You don't have folks coming in from either abroad or on many of the tourist sites in Dubai. You're not seeing people coming like they used to. Of course, it will be affected, but I think that is only short term.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like you said, there's, you know, the places and destinations, you know, museums, places in terms of the travel and tourism are going to be hugely affected. But like you said, I think it's just for the interim period. Once people can move around, they should start to pick up. I think that question was directed at you because obviously you're looking after some major iconic assets in Abu Dhabi. Thank you, Carla. I'm just going to have a look and see if we've got any more questions. Another one for you, Carla. Do you expect that leave costs will be accrued or resources will be suddenly, or people basically want to take leave when flights resume? So once they open up, do you think a lot of people are going to want to jump on a plane and go to their home countries?
No, that definitely won't happen. We've got too many great leaders now who are coordinating things. I was just saying to a friend of mine the other day that your usual CAFM administrator or FM administrator is going to transform into a scheduler soon. And you're going to find people doing a lot of scheduling, not just for occupancy of spaces, but you know, doing the logistics of services being delivered in corporate spaces, staff coming in and working out the puzzle as to how we do that without going over occupancy stipulation from the government.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Carla. Alex, we've got a question for you. What will be the operational impact if services are increased? So, for example, you know, temperature scans and check-ins, and yet available numbers are reduced due to lower budgets.
Real simple technology. We're already seeing the emergence of certainly AI platforms and other technologies used to complete some of these activities. So I forget which one it was. One of the free zones has already published that they're using an AI overlay on the CCTV to monitor social distancing within the free zone. So we'll actually start to see, and going back to one of the questions that we had earlier, we'll start to see innovations on the technology front that will directly relate to some of these matters, such as temperature scans, social distancing, or physical distance monitoring, check-ins, and all of these things, which hopefully will be able to meet the increased requirements alongside the lower budgets. And I think we're just going to enter a very new phase of innovation. And I think, as Abdullah mentioned earlier, you know, people's reluctance around IT security and around some of these matters have already relaxed because of the pandemic. So I think it's a real unique opportunity for this industry to really get on board and start to drive some of these technology changes, particularly over things like CCTV systems, the BMS systems, bin systems, and really start to drive those technological changes that previously we haven't been allowed to do. The building data, we're not allowed outside of the building, whereas now they have done. So what more can we do and really push that envelope now there's a level of acceptance?
Great, thank you. And do you think there's you know, can we kind of gauge what kind of balance of additional cost that will have in terms of the technologies that you've mentioned? Do you think companies have possibly, included that in their budgets, or is it too early to do so?
I think it's too early to do so, but I think you'll just see a repurposing of budgets to meet those challenges, and I think you'll start to see, very much as we have done in the energy sector, hopefully you'll start to see this being managed from a business case perspective, which is if a service provider comes forward and says, okay, with this technology overlay on your BIM, on your BMS, on your CTV system, whatever it might be, this is your repayment in terms of OPEX costs. And this is the added advantage we can give you. Hopefully, companies will repurpose budgets based on a business case driven scenario. And then that just puts the emphasis back onto the FM professionals, such as us, to actually make sure that we are very, very clear and understanding in that business case.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks, Alex. I just want to thank the 23 people that actually asked the questions. I'm sorry, we're not going to have time for any more. We had Mick, Sunej, Yusuf, Nada, Andrew and Fahad ask some questions. So thank you for that. Unfortunately, we've actually come to the end, or coming to the end of the session. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting today's session, and I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as I have. Please be sure to join us for the next webinar in the series, which will be taking place in July. David will be providing some upcoming dates of events for your diaries shortly. Just before he does, I'd just like to say some thank yous. I'd like to sincerely thank all the attendees and participants of the webinar and of the straw polls. And obviously, without you, it won't be possible. It's always great to have your feedback and input and a very transparent look at what's happening in our industry. Of course, a huge thank you to our wonderful panelists for sharing their expertise and knowledge on such a controversial subject. And a big thank you to our amazing support team, both in the UK and the UAE. And again, without them, this would not be possible. So thank you to them. Of course, I'd like to thank the IWFM UAE sponsors. If we could show our sponsors, great. A big thank you to you all. So that's Adib FM, Quality Refrigeration and Air Conditioning, BFM, Mace, Tafawuk, which is an Eltizam company. On behalf of IWFM, I'd like to extend our thanks to you all. As time is pressing on, it's going to be a goodbye from me. And over to David to wrap things up.
Okay, lovely. Thank you for that, Sara. You got a virtual hand clap from all of the people attending. We actually had at a peak about 111 people online. So thank you to each and every one of you for sparing the time. For your diaries coming soon, tomorrow there is the next in the series of IWFM webinars, Navigating Turbulent Times, which is at 3 o'clock Gulf Standard Time tomorrow. Coming up in July is the London exhibition, possibly. I have to put a caveat on that, whether they'll actually take place or not. We are planning to have our next webinar on the 22nd of July, which will be number 3, and that will be just before Eid, to be confirmed. Then the IWFM conference will be 25th of September, subject to full confirmation again, and also the IWFM Awards, which are almost definitely going to go ahead because they can plan ahead to the 13th of October. More details of that on the website, which is at iwfmawards.org. So all of those references down below. For all those that want to give us specific feedback, we would appreciate, as we transition back into converted work schedules, whether or not you'd like to go ahead with the start time at 4 o'clock, as we've done today, or to come up with an alternative. Please give us your feedback on the IWFM UAE Region group, and I encourage each of you to join that if you wish to on LinkedIn. Also, for the more social aspects, we've got a UAE group on Facebook, and coming up soon will be the UAE Twitter pages as well. So that's important to get your feedback. You'll get at the end of this essentially a little pop-up quiz, which is to ask you for your direct, personal, anonymous feedback as to whether or not you enjoyed it. Does the format need improving? Would you attend the next one? And indeed, always the balance question, would you insist on inviting a colleague or a friend to the next one? And would you suggest a panelist or a topic? You may yourself be somebody who wants to volunteer to join us. If you do, that's fantastic. Get in touch with me or Sara, or launch yourself via IWFM's LinkedIn or Facebook sites. And if you have a topic that you'd like to see discussed or a question developed, please come through to us there. Other than that, thank you very much. Have a good day, and that's us finished at 5 o'clock on schedule. Thanks very much for participating. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.